Sometimes life strips you bare, leaves you with nothing but a name, an old pair of boots, and the things you carry inside. For Jacob Reed, it was his integrity and the rough skill of a carpenter's hands. 6 months ago, he had employees, a thriving business, and a family who believed in him. Now, he had a battered toolbox salvaged from pawn shops and dumpsters, and a stomach that often growled more than it didn't. But when a stranger offers a roof and a hot meal in exchange for a little honest work, maybe, just maybe, it's not the end of the line after all. Maybe it's the start of something that neither of them could have predicted. Chapter 1. The Offer. The bitter wind cut through Jacob's threadbare jacket as he made his way down Orchard Avenue, his toolbox heavy in his hands. He paused outside Maggie's diner, watching customers file in and out. Each time the door opened, it let out a shrill creak that made people flinch. He had been watching that door for days now. He could fix it. 20 years of carpentry hadn't left his hands yet. With a deep breath, Jacob stepped inside. The warmth and smell of bacon made his empty stomach twist. Behind the counter, a broad-shouldered man with silver-streaked hair was wiping glasses clean. "Sir," Jacob said, his voice rusty from disuse, "I noticed your door's in rough shape. I'm a carpenter. I can fix it." The man's eyes flicked over Jacob's worn boots, his patched jeans, and his calloused hands gripping the handle of his toolbox. "What would it cost me?" the man asked. "Breakfast," Jacob replied, "and maybe a cup of coffee." The man considered him for a long moment, then nodded. "Name's Frank." Jacob. An hour later, the door swung silently on freshly adjusted hinges. Frank tested it several times, his smile growing wider with each smooth motion. "You've earned more than breakfast," Frank said, leading Jacob to a booth. A steaming plate piled high with eggs, bacon, and hash browns appeared in front of him moments later. Jacob ate slowly, savoring every bite. As he ate, a woman in a tailored suit entered. She paused at the door, testing it with an odd intensity before walking to the counter. Jacob's gaze lingered. Something about her attention to detail sparked a flicker of curiosity, but he had learned not to hope for much. Not anymore. Chapter 2. The Stranger at the Door. The next morning, Jacob returned to the same bench across from Maggie's diner. He wasn't there for another handout. It was simply safer than sleeping under the bridge by the train yard. At mid-morning, the same woman appeared again. This time, she wore casual jeans and a weathered leather jacket that still looked more expensive than anything Jacob had ever owned. She approached him directly. "You fixed the door," she said. Jacob's fingers tightened on his toolbox handle. "Yes, ma'am." She smiled. "I'm Elena. I've been watching you for a few days." Jacob stiffened, but she continued, her voice gentle. "You helped that woman with her cart the other morning. Fix the chain on those kids' bikes. I think you're exactly who I'm looking for." He frowned. "Looking for? I have a cabin," she said. "It needs work. A lot of it. I'll give you room, board, and a fair wage if you're willing to help me restore it." Jacob didn't answer right away. Deals that sounded too good to be true usually were. "Why me?" he asked. "You could hire any contractor." Elena's expression softened. "I've seen how you work. You care." Her offer hung in the cold morning air between them. Finally, Jacob nodded. "Let me see the place." Chapter 3. Cedar Hollow. Elena's car was clean but understated, like everything about her. They drove out of the city, past farmland and forests painted in autumn hues, until the road turned to gravel. The cabin appeared through a stand of cedar trees, 2 stories of weathered wood and sagging beams. Jacob's trained eye saw everything immediately. The broken shutters, the porch railing barely clinging to its posts, the roof with moss creeping over missing shingles. "It's been empty for 5 years, Elena said quietly. "My grandmother was the last to live here." Jacob set his toolbox down and ran a hand along the rough grain of the porch rail. "Old-growth cedar," he murmured. "You don't see wood like this anymore." "Can it be saved?" she asked. "Everything can," Jacob replied. "With enough care." Her relief was almost palpable. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and time. Furniture lay draped under yellowing sheets. The kitchen was sparse but functional, and there were 2 bedrooms upstairs. I had the utilities turned back on, Elena said. Water, heat, electricity. There's food in the kitchen and clean linens in the closet. Jacob turned in the entryway, his gaze taking in the warped floorboards and peeling plaster. 3 months, he said. Maybe more. Take whatever time you need, Elena answered. And so he stayed. Chapter 4, Building Trust. Jacob rose early every morning. His body remembered the rhythm of honest work, and his hands, though stiff at first, quickly returned to their old precision. Each day, Elena arrived around 9, carrying her laptop and what Jacob suspected was very expensive coffee that she pretended was from the corner shop. She worked at the kitchen table, sneaking glances at him through her glasses. On the 3rd day, as Jacob stripped the roof of rotted shingles, he asked for a pry bar. To his surprise, Elena climbed the ladder and handed it to him herself. When's the last time you did manual labor? He asked. She laughed. Is it that obvious? Jacob gestured to her manicured hands. They've never seen a splinter. Then teach me, she said. And he did. Chapter 5, Beneath the Surface. Elena was a quick learner. Soon, she was sanding boards, replacing trim, and hammering nails with steady hands. But Jacob noticed things. How she took phone calls in rapid-fire business jargon. How her laptop screen sometimes showed complex financial documents. How she paid for rush-delivered lumber in cash. One evening, as they shared sandwiches on the porch, she finally asked, "What happened to your business?" Jacob stared at the forest. "My wife got sick. Cancer. I sold everything to pay for treatment. When she died, there was nothing left." Elena didn't offer sympathy. She simply listened. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I can't imagine." Jacob nodded. Mary would have liked this place. And, somehow, it felt right to say her name aloud again. Chapter 6, Cracks and Foundations. The western wall was worse than Jacob had feared. Water damage had eaten through a major support beam. With a storm on the horizon, he worked late into the night to stabilize it. Elena was there the entire time, holding flashlights, passing tools, asking smart questions. By dawn, they had saved the wall and the cabin along with it. "We did it," she whispered, pride shining in her face. And Jacob realized he was starting to trust her, even though he knew she wasn't telling him everything. Chapter 7, The Mask Slips. Elena's absences grew longer. Her phone calls became more urgent. One morning, Jacob found her standing by the fallen oak they had planned to cut into boards. She was staring at it like it held all the answers in the world. "You're not just anyone," Jacob said quietly. "No," she admitted. "I'm Elena Marlowe, CEO of Marlowe Global Holdings." Jacob's stomach tightened, but he said nothing. "I wanted to be someone else here," she continued. "Someone without a fortune. Just me." He nodded slowly. "You found her." Chapter 8, The Storm. The storm hit harder than expected. Floodwaters threatened the foundation. A massive oak swayed dangerously close to the cabin. They worked side by side in the driving rain, digging trenches, securing braces, and hauling sandbags. When the oak finally fell, it missed the cabin by inches. Soaked, muddy, and exhausted, they stood in the kitchen drinking terrible coffee and staring at each other across the table. "I've never felt more alive," Elena admitted. "Neither have I," Jacob replied. Chapter 9, New Plans. The following days were filled with work and new ideas. Elena proposed transforming Cedar Hollow into a center for restoration arts, a place for people needing a second chance like Jacob once did. She had the resources. He had the skills. And together, they had a vision. Chapter 10, Truth and Restoration. When Elena returned from a final board meeting in New York, she handed Jacob a folder. Inside were architectural plans and legal documents. The Mary Reed Center for Restoration Arts, the heading read. Jacob swallowed hard. "We'll teach people how to restore buildings," she said, "and maybe themselves along the way." He signed. Épilogue, Seconde Chance. Cedar Hollow's restoration was complete. The grand opening brought reporters, board members, and former skeptics. But for Jacob and Elena, it wasn't about the headlines. It was about the young woman learning to sand her first board. the veteran rebuilding a doorframe, the man who once thought he'd lost everything, teaching a class on woodcraft. They stood on the porch, hand in hand. "You ready?" Elena asked. "Always," Jacob answered. And they walked toward the future they had built together, one restored piece at a time.